The question is that the motion be agreed to. Chris Farfoy.
I'd like to thank the Minister who just rose to take a call on the second reading of this bill, because she took 2 minutes to speak to this bill, as opposed 2 minutes, as opposed to the Minister in charge of this bill, who said that this bill was such a priority for this government that she gave it all of 1 minute's attention in this House. 1 minute's attention in this House. If this is such a priority for this government, why have the two ministers that this bill roughly comes under the area, why have they spent the collective wisdom of 3 minutes in this House, 3 minutes, to go through the merits of bringing this bill in? 3 minutes. 3 minutes, not one mention in the Finance Minister's speech yesterday. 3 minutes, not one mention in the Finance Minister's speech, not in the media pack. We're told that maybe there is a press release. Maybe there is, and I'll take the Minister's word at this. There apparently is a press release, but Mr. Speaker, this bill has been the dirty little secret of this budget. Because where did it come from? It's so important, it's such a priority that we're in this House debate here that the National Party did not want to even talk about it. Go and find the press release on Tony Ryall's website. Fine, we'll go have a look. But it's burrowed away somewhere, I'm sure, in amongst what else he's saying, about the health budget in this year's budget delivered yesterday. Mr. Speaker, we are going to oppose this bill, and we support other parties that are going to oppose this bill too. And yes, we're going to oppose it because the process is poor. Mr. Speaker, I've already mentioned the fact that this bill has kind of snuck up on us, but the people who are concerned about this in our community, and this is the elderly and the families of the elderly, won't get to have their chance to have their say on it. And as I think it was Mr. McLeod before, or maybe it was the member from Hamilton East may have mentioned, he thought that the measures taken in this bill was going to help the government get back on track in terms of its fiscal plan. Well, $4.5 million in the first year of savings is hardly a significant step change for the economy in order for this bill to become a reality. And Mr. Speaker, if this is one of National's big ideas in this budget, I would hate to see the little ones. I would hate to see the little ones, because this is going to save us in the first year $4.5 million. It will affect 170 elderly people around the country, and their voice, Mr. Speaker, in this process, their voice in this process, Mr. Speaker, has been taken away from them. And I'm sure there'll be many, many families around the country who are concerned about the welfare of their elderly mothers, fathers, grandparents, who have spent, yes, that's a very good point, Sumrani, who have spent their lifetime saving to make sure, they've done the right thing. They've paid off their mortgage, and now they find the fact that this government wants to take money off them. So again, I make the point, this budget has hit the young and the old, and probably everyone else in between. So, Mr. Speaker, this is another example, another symptom of a government with no plan to deal with the big issues. Instead of dealing with the big issues, it's almost like a really bad horror movie where someone's doing the dishes and someone is coming up from behind them with a dagger, and you shout, "No, there's something, you need to address that problem that's behind you. There's someone come up, there's a big problem behind you. Look out, but no, you keep doing the dishes because the dishes are the right thing to do." No, survival is the right thing to do. Survival is the right thing to do. And this budget that has been delivered this week is a bad B-grade horror movie. And unfortunately, the people of New Zealand woke up and it was their own personal nightmare. And that's why we need some real leadership, and the people, and especially the elderly people of New Zealand, need some leadership in this area too. This is tinkering. $4.5 million in the first year, and the fourth year, 16.4. Aged care in New Zealand is going to become an increasing important issue for our nation. And if we don't start addressing this in a way that is not tinkering, and this bill is certainly an example of that, we're going to have big problems. So that's why we need to have that select committee process, so people from both sides of the fence can have this debate, because it would be an opportunity for that, but they're not going to get that. It would have been a great opportunity for Rory Reid and his team from Grey Power to come forward and say, hey, we don't necessarily agree with this. We think that you guys should take a broader approach to how we go forward and maybe work together across this Parliament to deal with how we deal with aged care going forward. But we won't get that. Instead, we get a piece of legislation that will do very little. It sneaks up on us. Doesn't even get a mention in the budget speech. Apparently, there's a press release. We get four pieces. We found it?
It's a paragraph in something else.
All right. There's not a press release. It's contained in a press release. So this is how proud they are. They're so proud of it, and it's such a priority that it's a paragraph in a press release, probably at the bottom of a press release. So it's camouflaged in amongst this budget. It's such a priority if this was such a priority, why wasn't it in the first paragraph of the Finance Minister's budget speech? So what we get is more contempt for the New Zealand people, more contempt for our elderly, and in a previous bill that this House considered, contempt for our paper boys and paper girls around the country. So what we've got here, Mr. Speaker, is another example of bad process from this government, taking away the voices of our elderly and their families who should get to have their say on this. And as I mentioned in my first reading speech, we should hear from the other side too, because I did see a press release out from Martin Taylor from the Aged Care Association. We should let him have his say as well. But no, this is going through under urgency, under dodgy process. No one gets to have a say on it, but this is the way the government wants to do the business on this. The government wants to do business on this on a very, very important issue that's facing our nation. Mr. Speaker, this is another example of a lack of leadership from this country. When we're looking for leadership in terms of growth, in terms of how we create jobs, in terms of how we look after our elderly, what do we get? What do we get? Tinkering around the edges. It's the low-hanging fruit strategy from the government. Let's steal a little bit from the paper boys and the paper girls. Let's take a little bit off our elderly, and we won't tell them about it. We'll just thrust it upon them in a very dodgy process in this House. Mr. Speaker, let them have their say. Let them have their say on this one, because 170 elderly people in New Zealand that this is going to affect surely should be able to have their say. Surely should be able to have their say, and the 610 in 2015 and 16 should be able to have their say as well. And their families. And their families. They're taking money away from some of our most vulnerable citizens in this country. People have paid taxes all through their life. They've done the right thing. They bought a house and they've built up their assets, and this is how they treat them. This is how they treat them. So do the right thing. Do the right thing. Make sure that you give these people their say. Give the other side a say too. But, Mr. Speaker, you should stay sitting down too. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, the member should stay sitting down. The member should stay sitting down. But again, this bill is another example of lack of leadership. Have a crack at the oldies, have a crack at the youngies, and they're probably going to have a crack at everyone else in between. But we haven't found that press release yet.
I call a point of order. Ian Galloway.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to table a document titled Health Receives Largest Increase in Spending, embedded within which is a single line reference to quote-unquote changes.
Order. We first want to know what is the source of the document.
Oh, the source is the Honourable Tony Ryle.
Is this in the public domain?
Well, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell, Mr. Speaker. It's hard to tell.
Is this on a website? Is this on a website?
It is on a website, Mr.
Well,
Speaker.
we're not going to entertain that. Dr. Paul Hutchison.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to speak on the social security